Start our second set of breakout sessions today. Uh, Today, this session was supposed to be chaired by Dr. Kaji Maruful Islam, but unfortunately, he couldn't make it. But we found a better option today here, and we are lucky to have Professor M.M. Akash. He is my direct teacher, and I'm really grateful that he kindly agreed to chair this session. I'm quite sure that the paper presenters and the participants will be immensely benefited from his comments and insights. We also have very distinguished discussant, Dr. Amin Masood Ali. He's a professor, Department of Economics from the Jahangirnagar University. And we also have four very important presentations today. Two from Sri Lanka, one from India, and one from Bangladesh. And so I'll just name their affiliation and their names. The Professor J.G. Sri Ranjit from Department of Economics, University of Peradeniya. I think he has a co-author. Probably they will present it jointly, as I have understood. Then also we have Dr. Roshan Ann Pereira. She is a research fellow and from Advocate Institute of Sri Lanka. Then Muhammad Mashruquzzaman, research officer, Rapid. And then Sushobhan Mahata, senior research fellow of University of Calcutta. So with this, I request Professor M.M. Akash to conduct the session, please.
What should I say? Good afternoon or good morning? Still good morning. Good morning to everybody. We have two sessions under this general topic, governance and political economy. The first one I presided before this one, and the younger people were there to present their papers. That was quite interesting. But now I think the more senior economists and presenters will be presenting their views on very complex and multidimensional topics on governance. The first paper, I think, relates to ethics and economics. The second is something like IMF negotiation. And the third is very interesting title. I do not know exactly what is meant by it. It says that it will discuss sentiment-driven data. We shall hear about it later on, what is sentiment-driven data for sector-specific economic trends. And the fourth one is naturally a large umbrella topic, media, democracy, and globalization. So we are waiting to hear from our distinguished presenters a very good presentation, and let us start. So shall I call or somebody is there to call? Okay, I just begin with Dr. J.G. Sri Ranjit, Professor J.G. Sri Ranjit. His paper's title is Do Ethics Matter in Economic Development? An Analysis of the Sri Lankan Experience. Oh, it's great because we are eagerly waiting to listen to Sri Lanka experience. This is very relevant for Bangladesh. Okay, let us hear from him.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you.
Excuse me, sir. Could you please unmute auditorium? I can't hear.
Hello. Okay, right. I think now it's okay.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you so
very much. Okay, so the topic for today is Do Ethics Matter in Economic Development? An analysis of the possible association between governance and development in Sri Lankan experience. Of course, Sri Lanka as one of the Asian countries, we thought of doing this research paper considering the current situation in Sri Lanka. I think more or less this might be relevant to other countries in the region as well. Therefore, I think we can discuss matters after paper. Yes. Okay, thank you very much, right. Yeah. So the introduction is the first slide, and then literature review, methodology, results and discussions, conclusion and policy recommendations. So the governance is the matter, I mean, as a proxy for ethics in economic development. So this is the kind of the main kind of theme that we thought of considering for this research paper. Of course, ethics is a bit, sometimes the definitions are a bit problematic, and also we found there are a lot of literature in relation to ethics. Sometimes we find this area in economics under the behavioral economics, right? The study of psychology as it relates to the economic decision-making process and individuals and institutions. So then when we start this paper, we had a bit difficulty in conceptualization. So how do we conceptualize? Because we know that very clearly the problem is there, but the difficulty is how to define it, how to measure it, and things like that. So therefore we decided to go for governance, right? So good governance that reflect the ethical standards of a country. So based on the worldwide governance indicators, we collected some relevant data and then started summarizing the views of the quality of governance. So good governance, we assume that it improves the economic and social interactions between institutions and citizens. And therefore governments gain capacity, trust, and faith that conducive to efficient resource use and lower transaction costs and so on. So therefore our intention is that if the governance, I mean the interaction between the government, institutions and people, and then the decision-making process, sort of like considering these matters and then how it relates to the economic growth in Sri Lanka. These line graphs showing you the governance indicators that we selected for this research study. The first one is the voice of accountability, and then the second one is political stability, government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, control of corruption, and economic growth. So if you were able to find the necessary data to do this research paper based on the source, World Bank or Governance, WGI. So in that website, we found the relevant data, and then we assume that if these indicators are going from low to higher levels, it will improve the economic growth. For instance, if the political stability is there, that will improve the economic growth. Voice of accountability, if that is there, then it will helpful for economic growth. And like that, other variables, even control of corruption, if that is going well, then it will be helpful for economic growth. So that is what we assume in conceptualization this research paper. Therefore, the research question we focused is whether ethical considerations can be empirically modeled and tested as a determinant of economic development. And the research objective is to explore the existence of empirical link of ethics as a determinant of economic development in Sri Lanka. Especially we considered the recent past, started from 1996 to 2023. Because of the downturn trend that we found in recent past, because of various, to our understanding, the ethical standards, lowering the ethical standards linked to lower economic growth. In fact, sometimes some researchers focus that COVID pandemic situation is the reason, but that affected almost all the countries. In fact, Sri Lanka, we experienced negative economic growth, whereas all the other countries in the region experienced some positive. Therefore, we decided to go with this path to explore some insights into the research problem. Okay, then I will invite my co-author to continue this presentation, then I will join finally. Okay, it's over to you, Dr. Mayoshi.
Okay, good morning, all of you, and thank you, my professor J.D. Sri Ranjit, for inviting me to present this one. And ethical governance foster transparency, accountability, and also it is help to political stability, help for the economic growth, sustainable economic growth in Sri Lanka. In this regard, we examine the empirical links between governance indicator on economic development in Sri Lanka, covering the period from 1996 to 2023 period. In this regards, our main dependent variable. It was GDP per capita. It's governance,
এখানে বলবো?
economic development. Its proxy is for economic growth rate. And
Excuse
here we
excuse me. Those
yes.
the person, the speaker, can you please show your slides in the screen?
Okay, I will share the presentation
Okay,
slide.
okay.
Thank you
Then
so much.
that will be easier for us from here.
Okay. Okay, can you see the presentation slides?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So figure 1 represents the conceptual framework for this analysis. As our dependent variable, economic development is proxied by GDP growth rate. And our explanatory variable, as governance indicator, we apply 6 variables: control of corruption, political stability and absence of violence, terrorism, rule of law, regulatory quality, voice and accountability, and governance effectiveness. For the dependent variable, data were extracted from World Development Indicator from 1996 to 2023. For the explanatory variable, data were collected from World Governance Indicator. So these explanatory variables explain about governance, ethical governance. So these variables we selected using previous studies. Okay, then I move to the analysis technique. In this analysis, we apply time series data analysis like as econometric analysis model, and we selected vector error correction model for the analysis. In this regards, equation 3.1, it presents the functional form for the model. GDP, it represents GDP growth rate. CC, PS, RL, RQ, VA, and GE are governance indicators, governance factors. In the econometrics model, equation 3.2 represent our econometrics model. In this model, gamma 0 represent intercept of the model, gamma 1 to gamma 6 represent our coefficients of the each governance indicator. Here, T denotes the time period from 1996 to 2023. In this regard, we are going to examine the links, existent links between governance indicator and economic growth rate in Sri Lanka to show do ethics relevant in the economic growth rate in Sri Lanka. Equation 3.3, this is the long-run equilibrium equation. To examine whether governance indicator and GDP growth rate has long-run relationship, we examine using this equation. In this equation, Q represents the optimum lag length. In this lag length selection, we apply lag length selection criteria. There are 6 types of lag selection criteria. In this regard, we examine SIC and AIC criteria. Theta 0 represents the constant of the model. T denotes the time trend, and theta 1 to theta 6 are the coefficient of long-run parameters of the variables, such as control of corruption, government effectiveness, etc. Then we check whether these variables, these independent variables have a short-run relationship with economic growth rate in Sri Lanka to prove our main aim. In this regard, we examine this equation, and then here error correction term which represent the speed of adjustment, and this is very important in our analysis. And estimation techniques. This is an econometric analysis. Also, this is considered as a time series analysis. In the time series analysis, we have to check many set of economic techniques. In this regard, we check descriptive statistic. Descriptive statistic is the it's provided a key characteristics of our data set or our variables. Then we check the correlation of analysis using correlation metric to identify whether they have correlated, highly correlated or not. And then we apply unit root test to check which model is best for our analysis. Then we check Johansson co-integration test to check how many long run equation can be found in our model. Finally, we check long run and short run relationship using vector error correction model. There are several economic techniques we apply such as diagnostic test also. Let's move on to the
Sorry,
results and discussion.
you avoid the tidbits and go quickly because the time has overrun. You were given 10 minutes to finish your presentation.
Okay, I will manage the time. So here we explain about descriptive statistic of the analysis. Mean, median, maximum, minimum value. All the variable represents positive value. And then we check the correlation analysis using the correlation matrix. You can see as the result, there is a negative correlation between control of corruption and voice of accountability, except all the variables have positive correlation. And also there are higher multiple correlation only in political stability and control of corruption, but it's considered as moderate correlated. And then we check the lag selection criteria using lag selection criteria methods. Here we also explain about AIC, a confirmation criteria and Sargent criteria. So we selected lag as maximum 2 lags in this model. Then this is the very essential table to check the unit root stationary properties of the data set. We applied augmented decoupler and Philippe-Perrin test to analyze the stationary properties of the variable. According to the test results, all the variables represents in the first difference level, you could see all variables are stationary. And then, according to the theory, we can apply vector error correction model or ARDL model. So in here, we apply vector error correction model and also we check the ARDL model too. And here, we found the one co-integration equation in the model according to the Truss statistics and Max Eichhorn statistics. Then when this is the very important part of our results, we check the strength and the direction of these independent variable on dependent variable. According to the test result, control of corruption, it has negative impact on GDP growth rate. It indicated that when control of corruption increases by 1 unit, it causes a decrease in economic growth, proxied by GDP growth rate by 0.2173 units. Because it creates a more stable and also open business climate and also investment climates attract and promoting fair competition. Here, political stability, rule of law, voice of accountability, governance effective variables has statistically significant at 5% significant level except regulatory
Sorry,
quality.
can you straight go to the conclusions, please?
Okay, so this is the short run results and this is the diagnosis, and now we are going to conclusion and policy recommendation. In this study, we could see there is a governance in shaping economic development in Sri Lanka. It also depends on the situation in Sri Lanka. Based on the finding of the research, it can be recommended that improving ethical standard of governance is a meaningful way have positive impact on economic development. As we could see in the results and discussion, political stability can sometimes lead to economic stagnation. That's why we could get a negative relationship between political stability and economic development in Sri Lanka. And also, the rule of law positively impact on the GDP growth rate in Sri Lanka, ensuring that stable and predictable legal framework in Sri Lanka. While these are generally seen as positive, a voice of accountability and also regulation law, but in our research we could found a negative relationship. The mainly it was the reason are some Sri Lankan we have some social welfare and then is improvement in these welfare and economic growth developing may initially lead to economic disruptions and to political instability, political changes. And also in the research, we also found that if governance reforms prioritize social and political stability, resources may be allocated about social welfare, regulatory, and strengthen the rather than economic productivity. Okay, this is the conclusion of our study according to the results you get from the econometrics analysis. And I will invite Professor Anjit to continue conclusion more.
Thank you, Dr. Maheshi. I think we don't have enough other time, right? So that.
You can speak two or more three sentences.
Okay, then what I wanted to emphasize is that now in Sri Lankan experience, we can see certain external and internal matters that relates to this kind of economic crisis, because externally, a lot of conditions are coming. Now, for instance, when we try to develop the garments industry, then European countries impose some restrictions about human rights violation. So therefore, these kind of conditionalities were there, which of course not considered here, but we had some chances to get low interest rate public debt from other countries, for instance, Japan. But due to some of these conditions, Sri Lankan government chose to select market rates, sovereign bonds from the international market. So currently we are unable to pay the public debt borrowed from these bonds, right, sovereign bonds. And internally, of course, we found that the government procedure, especially the lack of transparency and lack of accountability and high corruptions, lawlessness, these things were infected the economic crisis. So this is what we found actually from this kind of study, and we started, tried to conceptualize it and then get into the economic modeling. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. So we will now have the second paper, I think. The second paper is also about external relationships with IMF, navigating reforms Sri Lanka experience from repeated engagements with the IMF by Dr. Roshan Annie Pereira.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Sanem for inviting us to make this presentation. I will just start with the motivation and the research questions that we looked at. So basically, why did we do this paper? Or what did we do in this paper? Basically, the paper examined the factors behind Sri Lanka's economic crisis, focusing mainly on its repeated IMF engagements and the lessons that can be drawn for future policy reforms. And I think that's not only for Sri Lanka, I think for other countries as well, and I think Bangladesh, this would be something you would be interested in as well. So why is this important? Because Sri Lanka has gone through a very difficult or very deep economic crisis. Now we're having some kind of macroeconomic stability, but moving beyond this is critical for long-term economic, for inclusive growth and stability. How did we do this? We basically reviewed the past engagements with the IMF, looking at their staff reports and other, Article 4 reports that they have done, and extracted some, the policy recommendations from those reports. We also interviewed Sri Lankans who have been very intimately or closely involved in many of these IMF programs, both here and at the head office as well, in the IMF as well. And we also then compared countries, looking specifically at countries which had repeated engagements again with Sri Lanka, actually more engagements in Sri Lanka to see whether there were some commonalities, and also countries that have actually graduated out of IMF programs to see what are the sort of favorable factors, or what are the factors that enable countries or are necessary for countries to graduate out of these IMF programs. Just to give you a kind of snapshot, the findings, basically we look at the need, actually one of the lessons that we learn is the need to prioritize structural reforms and the need for institutional building and strengthening, and in order to break this sort of the repeated cycle of IMF reforms, the need for governance and sustainable economic management. And I think this is something that has come out in many of the sessions over the past few days. Just to give you a quick snapshot, Sri Lanka basically has had a persistent, these twin deficits have been something that we've experienced over many years, and this is one of the main reasons why we've had to keep going back to the IMF. So that's just sort of as background. But basically, you can see that Sri Lanka has been a repeated client of the IMF. We've been there 17 times. We're now currently in our 17th program. And in most cases, the reason why Sri Lanka had to go to the IMF is because of some kind of either an external shock or an internal shock. So though we've kind of had these crises or twin deficits, every time we've had to go to the IMF, it's because we have been hit by some kind of crisis and had to, either it was an oil shock or global financial shock, which was the externally crisis that came externally, or an internal shock like a drought or the Easter bombings that we've had, or some kind of natural disaster. So those are kind of the background to these various IMF programs. I'm going to skip this because this gives the timeline of the various shocks and when we had to go into IMF programs, but I'm going to skip this in the interest of time, and then just look at, so when we went through these IMF programs, what we identified was there's a sort of a repeated themes or repeated policy recommendations that come into all these IMF programs. So if we looked at the last 2 decades, because going beyond that was that the conditions are very different, you'll see that from the 2000s onwards, in all the IMF programs, there have been the same kind of policy recommendations. So fiscal consolidation has been paramount in almost all the IMF programs. There has been a concerted sort of recommendation for fiscal consolidation. And the other one is, of course, the exchange rate flexibility and reserve building. Because again, that was one reason why the country had to go to the IMF, because basically we had run down our reserves and we were not able to meet our financial obligations. And in the last instance, we actually had to do a debt default. So in 2022, Sri Lanka went on basically unilaterally went on that, basically defaulted on their debt. And that was mainly because we didn't have enough foreign reserves. So if you can see, most of the IMF programs really focus mainly on macro stability. This time, hopefully, things are slightly different because we have put in place some governance frameworks to ensure that these, we don't regress. Because as you can see, during an IMF program, there is macro stability, we do all the right things, but soon as we are out of program, we go back. And that's why we had to go back to the IMF subsequently. Now they have put in place a few governance frameworks like the Central Bank Act, which precludes monetizing the deficit, Public Finance Management Act, which has limits on primary expenditure, primary surplus, and also some debt sustainability targets, which are both in the Public Finance Management Act and a Debt Management Act. So as you see, though macro stability is necessary, what I want to emphasize is it's not sufficient for long-term growth. If you look at the long-term growth trajectory of Sri Lanka, you see that we've been growing at around 4.5%. This is not sufficient. I mean, we are all aspiring to become high-income countries. We're not going to be able to do that at this level of growth. This is even important for our debt sustainability, because even with our debt restructuring that we have undergone, after 4 or 5 years when we will have to start paying back the capital on our debts, our debt to GDP is still going to be almost 100%. So unless we grow, we're not going to be able to really have real debt sustainability. So what do we need? We need structural reforms. If you go back, and we went back to the IMF reports and looked at, okay, what are the structural reforms that are highlighted? And again, we saw patterns. There are several, and I'm just only looking at 3 of them. There are some others as well. But these are the kind of reforms that kept getting repeated. And one was trade reform. I think we had a good discussion yesterday on Bangladesh. I would have said, you just replace it with Sri Lanka, you get the same, you'll be saying the same things really about Sri Lanka. Because we have to have trade reforms, because Sri Lanka has also been a highly protected country. Our trade to GDP has declined over the last 20, 30 years. And we are a small economy. So we have to open, we have to trade. So that is definitely one reform that has been emphasized. The other one is, of course, labor reforms, because we're quite expensive in terms of labor and also the kind of skill sets. And I think you're going to have a big discussion on that this afternoon. I'm sure it'll be very similar. So I'm not going to go into details on what the type of reforms. I have put some of them here, but I'm not going to go into depth in the interest of time. And the third one, of course, is SOE reform, because the government has a huge footprint in the economy, absorbs a lot of the investments or capital, labor, which means that these also have to be reformed if we are to unleash the potential of the private sector. But what we did was looking at this, and also through these unstructured interviews that we had on the IMF program, we identified reasons why Sri Lanka has not been able to undertake the reforms that are necessary. One is, of course, it has always been sort of an external reform agenda. We have not had a domestically led long-term reform strategy that was owned within the country. And as a result, there has been a lot of public resistance in terms of the implementation of these reforms. So it's always been an IMF program. And it also has been inconvenient for politicians to put the scapegoat as the IMF and not really own the reform agenda. The other one is, of course, weak institutions and administrative capacity. So within the bureaucracy, a lot of these reforms have to be implemented at the political level and at the governance level, which is at the bureaucratic level. And if they don't understand and if they don't own the reforms as well, it is difficult for them to actually implement those reforms. The other one is political will, because what we have seen in these cycles is one of, the election cycles are a huge stumbling block to reform, because every time you come to close to elections, you have a huge spending increase, which is one of the reasons for the fiscal lapses. So there is no sort of political will, because each government only has 5-year cycles, so they're not really interested in long-term reform. It's more kind of how do we get re-elected. And the third one, of course, is the resistance from powerful interest groups. And that is mainly in terms of the trade reforms, I would say, because there are few industrialists who benefit from these trade protection, and they have a huge voice in terms on the government, whoever the government is in place. So it's very difficult to get these reforms done because they kind of control the politicians. So quickly to go through the policy recommendations, because I'm out of time. I think we need to have establish macroeconomic stability beyond these IMF programs, because as I said, IMF programs are only really meant to ensure this stability. But once you finish the program, how do you ensure this long-term stability? Building this political consensus over the reform trajectories. I think that is very important, because how do you bring everybody on board? How do you bring people? Because there's very little, the low economic and financial literacy, I think, is a huge problem in building this, getting this buy-in from everybody in terms of the kind of reforms that you need. And also this whole political cycles, as I talked about, the election cycles. And also to get, and creating this public ownership of reforms. And finally, of course, strengthening institutions. And I think that is really critical, because unless you have the bureaucracy is also behind these reforms, it's going to be very difficult to get any of these reforms done. So thank you very much. I'll maybe take some questions during the discussion.
Thank you. Now we will go for the third paper. Beyond it is that sentimental data-driven things. Okay, Mohammad Mashrukuz Zaman, Research Officer, Rapid.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So, since Sir has already mentioned, I'm Ashok Zaman and I'm working as a research officer at Rapid. Am I audible now? I guess, yeah, sure. Well, so my topic basically starts as that beyond traditional metrics, analyzing sector-specific economic trends for Bangladesh using the sentiment-driven data. So I would start with the rationale first. So for an example, let's just look into the simple graph here. So the GDP growth rate, a percentage annual of different countries. For an example, there's Bangladesh, China, Pakistan, US, and also United Kingdom. So even though they're like developed and developing countries, we can see, I think we all have some idea what happened during 2020, right? So seeing this, there was this COVID-19 pandemic, and the pandemic hit all the economies so hard that the countries were at a dilemma what sort of policy they need to implement. So for an example, so such sort of crisis required an immediate and effective policy implication. So crafting such sort of effective policies required timely indicators. For an example, the developed countries like USA and also the other ones, Canada, they come up with different sort of high frequency data sets, for example, which gives a real-time economic insights. So there's a weekly GDP measure in the USA, and also on the other countries, the mobile phone users, credit card transaction, and some sort of a new thing is basically the satellite imageries. So on the other hand, for a developing country like Bangladesh, we face significant challenges in accessing the real-time data. Hence, during crisis-like moments like that, we had to rely on gray literatures like the NGO reports, public policy briefs, and also media opinions to craft effective policies, and not sure if these were evidence-based or not. So besides, the pandemic also hit the economy, different sectors of the economy unevenly. So there's an important to understand the sectoral responses, and also that would evaluate the effectiveness of the government measures that were different business sizes. So my research question is regarding, first of all, how did each sector in Bangladesh perform from 2020 to 2022 based on the sentiment-driven data? Well, to explain the sentiment-driven data a little bit more, so I have taken a data set that comes from Facebook business activity. For example, the small and medium-sized business from the economy, they capture the they capture their activity level based on the posting behavior. For an example, not necessarily that during pandemic they start posting more, and basically if they start posting more, that would give a higher business activity. They have compared it with the pre-pandemic level as well. For an example, if a page generally used to post more, then again, not necessarily he has to post more than this pre-pandemic level to get a higher value. And second of all, the question is, how have the government policies, particularly during COVID-19, affected the sectoral recovery and resilience? And finally, the sentiment-driven data, does it align with the quarterly real GDP trend during the period discussed? Well, I would keep it short. The social media, throughout the time, there are countries that have used social media data to real-time crisis response and disaster management. And one notable study is by Ari and the colleagues, who offered a cost-effective and scalable method during a post-disaster recovery status of small businesses in Nepal, Puerto Rico, and Mexico through the analysis of this particular data set that I have used. And besides, the results were also validated against the national data sources. And one notable study I would like to mention, it was some sort of like a motivation for me to look into other sort of data. That was basically a senior from a university, so Soed Rafsan Ali and Sadawul Bashar. So the remote sensing data, so they used the nightlight data, nightlight intensity, and that provided insights into infection rates and mortality during and also the economic activity across Bangladesh's several districts. Since I have already described about the Facebook business activity data, so the data set is basically available at a daily interval, and the data set consists from 1st March 2020 to 29th November 2022. And also there's also another data set that I have taken from the Oxford Government Response Tracker. It's also a panel data set, and the data set contains from January 1st to technically March 2023, but however, so to merge these two data sets together, I taken the time frame that is relevant to the Facebook business activity data. Well, the methodology is initially very simple. I tried to look into the ordinary least square, the OLS method, and to check what different sort of responses affect the business activity and also the different sectors. So to start with the descriptive statistics a little bit, this is basically the descriptive statistics from the overall data set. Thank you. And then again, all the business sector, that would mean basically the overall activity of the 11 different sectors, plus if there's any other businesses that is not included into these sectors. So overall, we can see the business and utility sector, home and services, and also public goods and restaurants, they faced a significant drawback due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And if we can go the descriptive statistic by year, we could see that there is a gradual decrease of activities across different sectors. For an example, overall, I'll just keep it short. So for the overall sector, even though the mean, first I would need to explain it a little bit. So the mean 0.5. So if this is around 0.5, that would mean a normal business activity. So anything above 0.5 would mean the business is growing or business is more active, and anything below it basically would mean the business is not active like the previous way. Well, this is technically a summary of the descriptive statistics. So however, the 0.5 line is marked at red, and you can see that most of the sectors have faced some sort of drawbacks in their activity because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's also a couple of sectors are there, basically the grocery and convenience stores, they are somewhat normal because all is a higher activity because these are mostly inelastic goods. They sell mostly the inelastic goods. So of course there would be have a normal activity. So the results of the ALS, so I had actually 14 descriptive independent variables, and also there's like 12 sectors available. So the results would be a bit too messy, but then again, I would just pick up a few of them if that makes sense or not. Stringency index average, so that is basically how strict the government response were based on it, based on the Oxford dataset, and the stringency index would have an average. The stringency index would have impacted the overall economy as a negative, for an example. Even though the impact is smaller, since we are talking about the small and medium-sized businesses more here. And the one interesting fact is that the economic support index, so that would consist of all the supports. There's income support as well, and also the supports from the government as well. So that has a negative impact on some of the businesses. So this might imply that probably the support the government was giving to different sectors or the people was not being targeted enough for the small and medium-sized businesses. I'm sorry. Sure. So I'll just jump to the other part of it since I don't have much time. Okay, so I ran the correlation matrix, and of course, different sort of government measures, they are supposed to be correlated. For an example, like the stringency index, that is indexed, and then again, there is other parts of it. For an example, the cancel public events and the restrictions of movement and the stay-at-home orders. So obviously, since there were some sort of correlation, and the high correlation available, I had to focus on different other methods as well. So one of such method was basically lasso, and also the other one is the Ritchie regression. So the lasso regression, what does it do is basically it shrinks the coefficient and gives us the estimate of which of the independent variable had a larger impact on my model. So if I have to summarize it a little bit, so technically consider about packing a suitcase. So that would be a rigid basically mean that you pick up everything the suitcase that can contain, and apart from it, the lasso technically taking out the different unnecessary clothes out of it. So the estimates of the lasso, I have keep both of them side by side so that we can get a comparison. So this gives a similar result for an example. So throughout my data set, the business activity quantile is basically, we can see the government response has a positive impact on this. So for an example, since different sort of measures that had, but then again, the coefficient is very small. And apart from it, you can see the content, for example, the closed public transport in that. So public transport or the closures had negative impact on different business sort of activity throughout my data set. And finally, for the comparison between the real GDP and Facebook data set, so we are supposed to see a similar trend here, not necessarily it should overlap each other, since I am dealing with only small and medium-sized businesses here. But then again, through these graphs, we can see that a few of the trends are similar, but then again, there's a strong difference after a while. And so it could be because the probably the real GDP sector, that mostly focuses on the high level or the more established businesses, whereas my data set would contain mostly the small and medium sized, those who could be considered as the informal economy as well. So besides that, that would be from my part. And the policy recommendation, sorry, I'll take just one more minute. So my study basically highlights, we need targeted policies, including the sector-specific wage subsidies and expanded supply chain support to address the disruption industries heavily reliant on physical presence like manufacturing. And we could also see some of the sectors that showed resilience in there. For an example, it was being very, probably they managed to shift to the online services more. For an example, restaurants see some sort of increase in their activity after a while. For example, we started ordering online and they all started operating online as well. And the retail and lifestyle services, they also showed some sort of resilience by quickly adapting to remote work. And besides, so I would recommend to use such sort of data set to at least get an idea regarding the economy during such crises. So thank you. That was all from my part.
Thank you. So the sentiment-driven data is the Facebook data, I think.
Yes.
Okay. So now the next paper will be presented by Shushobhan Mahata, Senior Research Fellow, University of Calcutta, on Media, Democracy and Globalization.
So, good afternoon, sisters and brothers of Bangladesh and all other dignitaries present here. So, my paper will be talking about the media sector. And by media, I here mean the news media, right? Not the entertainment media, only the news media. So, you see that media markets are special in many ways, right? They take on a much important role than their accounting contribution to GDP, right? Why? Because on one hand, media is a provider of information, right? Information that influences the electorate, the voters, right? So on one hand, the media by necessity filters and biases this information very systematically, right? And that affect a wide range of political, economic, and social outcomes, including the corporate accountability, right? And the social accountability and the political accountability as well. So because of these effects, the media is a particular industry that is specifically regulated by the most democratic as well as non-democratic countries. So, and on the other hand, we have FDI, one of the main factor of globalization, right? So you see that, however, means we deviate from the standard way of doing FDI growth and wage inequality linkages, and we move on to the impact of FDI on media. So basically, my paper is an interlinkage or the intersection between three things. One is globalization, another is a media sector, the news media outlets, and another is the democracy, right? That is how globalization is impacting democracy through the media sector. So you see, whenever we talk about globalization, so people become skeptical. For example, Kaushik Basu in one of his lectures argued that globalization is detrimental to democracy. But you see, globalization is an undeniable fact, just like gravity is an undeniable fact. We will have globalization, right? So we can discuss the good and bad of gravity, but we cannot say that, no, we should stop gravity. Similarly, we can discuss the good and bad of globalization, but we cannot stop globalization from happening, right? So what we can do is that we can think about what could be the structural adjustment, right, in the context of globalization to make things accommodating. So as said, that my paper is the intersection, and this intersection in an otherwise general equilibrium framework that I'll be using, right? So this starts with the work of Sugato Marjit, one of the renowned trade theorists in India and also one of my co-authors. So this paper falls second in line after that. These are just some, for motivation purpose, or how Indian news media is dealing with the different issues. You see, communal issues are always on the top. They are providing maximum coverage to communal issues. But issues like inflation or unemployment, either they have zero coverage or very less coverage, right? And it holds not only for the Hindi-speaking media, but also for the English media groups, right? And also you see that there is a recent acquisition of NDTV, one of the most neutral media it was. So Adani Group, Adani is one of the big corporate entity in India. Adani Group acquired NDTV to the means of debt and debt burdens. So this is how media issues are getting concentrated on few topics of communal issues, right? Now you see why this is happening. So one of the reasons is that in India, the media is basically run on ad revenue-based system, right? So their majority chunk of revenue comes from advertisement, right? Not from subscription. The subscription rates are too low to run the media houses, right? So they depend on advertisement. Now you see, whoever provides advertisement, they will have a say in the media sector. For example, if the corporate sector is providing the majority of the advertisement, then a corporate will have a hold, right? And what is the incentive for corporate to take on the media sector? That is because corporates had to lobby with the government, right, to bargain over the corporate taxation or other kind of benefits on exports or some other items, right? So in that sense, if corporate has a hold on media or the corporate owns the media, they have a large bargaining power when they come into bargaining with the government, right? Similarly, government has an incentive to give advertisement to the media sector and take hold of media sector, because government has their own political office to hold, right? So the most important thing is that why FDI is restricted to the media sector. See, when you talk about media sector in a broad sense, right, it includes the entertainment industry as well as the cinemas. So in the cinemas and the other entertainment industry, FDI is allowed at 100%. But you see, in case of news and current affairs, the inflow of FDI is restricted to 26%, and that too through government route, not automatic approval, right? So FDI is restricted in the media sector. So these are the background and motivation that how media is turning from fourth pillar of democracy to a political broker or corporate intermediary, and how India's world press freedom index is slipping down, right? And how donation by corporates are getting concentrated to a particular political party, right? Recently, the Supreme Court of India judged and published the electoral bond. Electoral bonds means electoral donation by the corporate, right? And what we found is that all the almost 90% of electoral donations are getting concentrated to the ruling BJP party, right? So how this is happening? And finally, the restrictive FDI. These are the research question that why is democracy prone to media seize if foreign capital is part of the equation, and whether media seize is reducing democracy to mere electoral autocracy. I heard that in Bangladesh also there was problem of voting, right? Votes were not much free and fair. But you see, in India, it may look like that people are going out, right, and giving votes, so it's a more free and fair election, but that is not so, believe me, because media is there to influence you. Although you are taking your finger, putting the votes, but actually it's not you that you are pushing your finger to some button, right? It's the media that has created a psychology in you, and that psychology is taking your finger on particular button, right? So that is also a threat to free and fair election. Free and fair does not mean that I am allowed to vote, but whether my psychologically means I'm providing the liberal space or not. So I'm dealing with a general equilibrium model, which is political economy general equilibrium model, call it PEGE model, with 2 sectors, 3 factors, and 2 political parties and 3 interest groups, right? And the representative political parties are the government, G, and the opposition or the challenger, O, and 2 sectors of production, which are non-media, sector 1 and sector 2, right? And we have media sector, sector M, and the factors of production are labor, skilled labor, capital, and J is media-specific factor. So you see that L and S are the voters, and they have overlapping characteristics. They can be committed to a particular political party, or they may not be committed to a particular political party, right? And they are, L belongs to the low-income household, and S are the skilled labor, they belongs to high-income household, right? Now, so basically, initially I have a dynamic game, and then this game is integrated into a general equilibrium framework. So in stage 1, sector 2 is a corporate sector, which is bargaining, which is actually playing a non-cooperative game with the government, right? In terms of holding media. So sector 2 is investing KM amount of investment in the media sector. Government is giving advertisement to the media sector. The competition is that who holds a larger chunk in the media sector, the government or the capitalist, right? In stage 2, once stage 1 is cleared, stage 2 capitalist and the incumbent political party bargains over the corporate taxation, that is T2, right? And XG, some other favor. And in stage 3, finally, party G chooses SG. SG is a political donation to the, or political cash donation to the voters, right? All the sectors maximizes profit, voters choose their support, and party O chooses S0. S0 is something like political dole, right? So all agents prior to the last stage are uninformed of voters type, because I've said voters can be committed towards a party or they may be non-committed, right? So if they're non-committed, their decisions are shaped by the media information, right? And if they're committed, then they do not look at the media, they just go and vote whoever party they have committed for, right? But this information is not known to anyone. So all agents are uninformed of voters types, but they know the distribution of the voters, the probability distribution, right? And voters among themselves are uninformed of each other types, right? So this is a general equilibrium structure, right? And then this is how first nature chooses whether a voter is committed or non-committed, and this the number in the parentheses are actually the probability distribution, right? So as I've said, if they're committed, they can be L type, S type, and they may be committed to party G or party O, right? And if they're non-committed, then they can lie anywhere between 0 and 1. 0 means commitment towards the incumbent party, and 1 means commitment towards the opposition party, right? They can be anywhere in between, and where they will be, that is shaped by the media information, right? So these are assumptions that I've already mentioned, and what is more important is that belief about anti-incumbency. So you see, there is anti-incumbency if a party goes in power for the long run, right? But means how anti-incumbency works? So you see that if I am thinking that there may be anti-incumbency against this party, it does not depend only on my thinking, but my thinking is shaped by how the other voters believe about anti-incumbency. So my belief is dependent on others' belief about anti-incumbency, right? And this affects, right? Because you see, why in India the party says double engine ki sarkar? Double engine ki sarkar means if center has the same power and if center has the same party and the state has the same party, then your works will be done easily. But if in center you have BJP, in state you have Trinamool, right, TMC party, then these are two different parties, so we will stop your work. The work in West Bengal will not go smoothly. So these are kind of psychological costs that parties are trying to create over the voters, right? Or they are molding the beliefs of the voters, right? And these are the standard utility function, that the technical part of the paper. So how basically this works? So you see that suppose there is fall in foreign capital supply in the media sector. Government is restricting FDI in the media sector. So because capital supply is less, supply is falling, so there will be a rise in returns to capital, simple demand supply, right? So if there is rise in returns to capital, then capital investment in the media sector becomes attractive for the other domestic capital suppliers. So domestic capitalists gain more control over media, right? Then its foreign counterpart, domestic capital flows from the corporate sector to the media sector, because now media have a high returns in capital, right? Because now capital flows to the media sector, domestic capitalists have a high bargaining power, right? And so what happens is that because capital is moving out of the traditional sectors to the media sector, so the traditional sector, there is fall in capital supply, due to which there is contraction of sectors. And if there is a change in this resource allocation, right, resource is getting shifted to some media sectors, then what is happening? This is standard general equilibrium result, that your wages are going to change. The skilled wage, the unskilled wages are going to change. And this will cause change in income inequality. Now, there is a paper that was published in Economics and Politics in Wiley, right? So that claims that whenever there is change in income inequality, there is also change in, suppose if income inequality rises under the present regime, then anti-incumbency cost will go up, right? So in that case, the government comes in to manage the media, because income inequality is rising because of this resource allocation, right? And this is costing the government. The government has a fear of losing power. In that case, government is now tempted to hold or gain more control over media. So this is how globalization is affecting the media sector, right? Through income inequality channels, through the media houses, right? So the final result is that we found, this is a conclusion only. So finally what we find is a donation specialization, that is concentration of donation to a particular party. Media cornering. Media cornering means cornering of topics of media discussion to a particular issue, and unprecedented cash for vote transfer. You see, in my case also, I was very hesitant to travel to Bangladesh. But then I met Professor Selim at Bangalore, And he convinced me that no, there is nothing like that. So actually what happened is that media actually brainwashed the Indian people. You see, the Indian, means they are showing that 24 hours war is going on in Bangladesh, tanks are moving on road, army tanks, right? But when I arrived here, I find nothing that sort. It's completely normal, right? In fact, I see that if you see India, there is a more nationalism threat, right? So this is how media is affecting this role. And in fact, I am one of the victim of those, but thanks to Professor Salim that he means actually saved this type of thinking, right? And just I want to end with one very small story that we all are aware of Joseph Stalin, right? The once the ruler of USSR. So Joseph Stalin was actually unaware of the subcontinent countries, India, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, like that. So one ambassador of India traveled to Russia, right, then USSR, and he met Joseph Stalin for a particular discussion on an issue. Then Joseph Stalin asked him that, where is India located? Where is this country? Then that Indian bureaucrat, had shown him the map of the South Asian map, right? And he looked at that, this is India. Then Joseph Stalin asked, wow, India is a really big country. Then what is the name of that island below India, right? What Indian island is that? Then that bureaucrat told him that that is not an Indian island. That is Sri Lanka, a completely different sovereign state, completely independent state. Then Joseph Stalin asked, why? Right? So basically he meant that why there is a very small neighboring country, Sri Lanka, that is independent, given that India is a large size. Why you are not going and seizing that? So the question of Joseph Stalin, why Sri Lanka is existing? So this is very surprising, right? That is their thinking. But India is, believe me, India never follows that kind of expansionary policies, that taking away the small neighboring countries. That is a policy of USSR and maybe other those communist countries, right? So that is what India's perspective is. Thank you very much.
The presentation part. Now I will have the discussant to give his comments on those presentations. We will move to the stage now. Okay. How much time we have? 30 or 40. Okay. So the commentator will be given 15 minutes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you, Sanem, for inviting me and giving me the scope to go through these 4 excellent papers. So I'm Amin Masood Ali, Professor, Department of Economics from Jahanagar University. So I will make some comments, and I have also some queries about these papers. So starting from the first paper presented by Professor Ranjit, so do ethics matters in economics? And sorry, you have to excuse me because I have suffering from sore throat, so it will be kind of interrupted. So first of all, this paper was started with ethical standard of the government, and then to represent the ethical standard, it used a lot of government effectiveness indicators, which are very much familiar in the these type of studies, where there are a lot of major studies, like they are showing the relationship between government effectiveness and GDP or development indicators. But in this paper, interestingly, the authors have used these indicators as a scale to represent the ethical standard of the government. So this is kind of rare and also interesting for me. I haven't found that much paper saying that these indicators should show the standard of ethicness. So I understand that at micro level, the standard of rightness or wrongness, that is the ethical standard. So we can say, okay, this is right or this is wrong. But at government level, it is the distinction between rightness and wrongness gets little blur. That is one thing I like to say, because especially in case of international relations. So there is no like an authoritarian government. It can have very good indicators in effectiveness, like a lot of in case of, say, accountability or, say, rule of law, control of corruption. But still, for the people, majority of people might think that the government is not ethical. they might have a different perception. So probably that's why we don't find like to use these indicators as a standard of ethicness. But again, this is a very interesting thing to do. Number 2 point I'd like to mention is like the title of the paper was showing the ethical standard and related it with economic development, though the paper mostly concentrated on GDP growth. So I would suggest that better it should say that we are trying to show the relationship between government effectiveness indicators with growth rather than development. If we say development, then we should try to capture other aspects of development, like we can use HDI or MPI, those types of indicators. Few other points, like I would like to see a lot of other controls. Like in this paper, the authors have used accountability, political stability, rule of law, control of corruption, these variables. But along with these variables, I would like to see some other control variables which actually affects the GDP growth rate. Another issue is in table 2, if the authors can follow the table 2. So it showed the correlation between the explanatory variables, because definitely these explanatory variables, the effectiveness indicators, they have a very high correlation among them. So they showed the correlation, but I would like to see the level of significance. So it might give it more insight about that. And then, as I have said, that an authoritarian government might have a good value in those effectiveness indicators, but for the people, they might not think that the government stands with a good ethical standard, because the authors also find that there is a negative association with absence of violence and terrorism with GDP growth rate, right? So it showed a negative association. So that clearly indicates that like a government, there might be an absence of violence and terrorism, but it has a negative association. So an explanation should be there. And lastly, about this paper, the paper covered the period from 96 to 2022. So during this period, there were a lot of structural changes, external shocks, those types of things. So I would like to see that the authors can actually disaggregate the time period and see what happened, especially in, I guess, 2006 or 9, there was a structural change, political change, regime change. So those types of regime change should be incorporated in the analysis, so that we can have a clear idea whether the pre or post regime change period, whether the effectiveness indicator changed and whether what impact it had on the GDP. So that's all about the first paper. I would like to move to the second paper by Dr. Roshan. She's here. So this was navigating reforms, Sri Lanka's experience from repeated engagement with IMF. So this is a very interesting paper, and especially for Bangladeshi readers. So it clearly says that like the fiscal deficit, public deficit, the twin deficit, those actually created the demand for IMF loans. But those intervention, IMF intervention, provided short-term stabilization. That's for true. But it wasn't that successful to bring a structural change. So that was the main finding, which is very important. And clearly, they have pointed out a lot of points or reasons for which the IMF loan wasn't successful. And I think Bangladesh should learn especially from these points. So I want to mention these points. The first one was election cycles, post-election tax concessions, political uncertainty, and policy reversal, which is very crucial for Bangladesh. Like whenever any regime changes, there is obviously policy reversal. So again, long-term benefits are not gained from these type of changes. Also, we have lot of similarities with Sri Lanka, like our informal sector is also large. So it gives a problem for any change in the labor market. Our labor force participation rate is low. Women's participation is also low. And also we have a lot of problem with inefficiency in state-owned enterprises. So like Sri Lanka, the value of Sri Lanka was 0.65 in inefficiency indicator, where in case of Bangladesh, I just have Googled it and it was 0.763, so much worse than that. So we need to work on this. So the key finding was crisis-driven reform agenda is not good for any sustainable change. So I have few issues, or I have some interest about this paper. I'd like to see like what was the impact of, like, is there any issue of corruption or unproductive investment of the IMF fund, or if there is any mismanagement of fund, these issues regarding the IMF loan, and also how large was this loan compared to some other sources. Was there any other available sources of loan for Sri Lanka, and actually how big it was, and whether there was any calculation or estimation of the local demand for the loan. Like we actually, countries like ours, we should actually have a calculation of the demand. We need to estimate the demand of the loan, and it should be domestically done, not imposed from the outside. So these things should be a learning issue for us. I like to also like to know what was the impact on some external shocks, like in Sri Lanka obviously went through a lot of external shocks. Pandemic was there was fuel crisis, there was a kind of, I think there was a terrorist attack. So those types of things happened. So, was there any impact of these external shocks on IMF loan demand? So, yeah, I think, and at the end, I would like to say, like, I totally agree with the authors or the paper that whenever we are taking the loan, definitely it will increase our interest rate. It will increase the utility prices, and the currency will depreciate, and it will cause inflation. So we need to actually properly estimate the local demand, and it's a very good paper in front of us to learn these issues, especially in the context of Bangladesh. So then I will move to the third paper. So this was by Mohammad Mushfiquzzaman, and it was analyzing sector-specific economic trends for Bangladesh using sentimental-driven data. So definitely, we have the limitation of data constraints. We have government data which comes with intervals, at least 5 years. The highest data set comes from 5 years interval, census 10 years. So there is a limitation, and this gives us a good scope to use the more timely data. But we have to be careful about one thing, that this is based on Facebook posting, so meta posting by the business owners. So in case of our country, like with the informal sector is so large, so we have to think that how many people of our country is using this facility, the Facebook facility, and how much of us are actually posting. Because during the pandemic era, outside of Dhaka or outside of the major metropolitan cities, the activity, the day-to-day activity was more or less normal. So these things should be incorporated in the analysis. So actually, I would like to say that this is more kind of urban-centric discussion where we are only focusing on how many posts are done by the admins of those business pages, and what was the response, rate of response, those things. And as this is a timely data, I would like to see more updated information. Like this data, this study only covered up to 2022. So I know that there is a limitation because it showed the relationship with the Oxford data. But again, with the metadata, we can relate it with the government official data. So the highest data of 2022 or those can give me a robust analysis. So this is one issue. Number two is I found that in the table that a lot of variables are showing the mean value is declining. So I like to see the explanation. Like, for example, the home service or retail sector, so these values are declining from 2020 to 2022. So it's not that much clear to me why these variables are declining. Number three is, so the study included 12 sectors. The 12 sectors are the dependent variable. Then there were some explanatory variables, but along with the explanatory variables, I like to see more control variables, which actually affects the GDP. So there should be some control variables. This analysis only included the explanatory variables, but I think including the controls will give a more accurate result. And also, as the explanatory variables are very much interlinked with them, so the correlation is also high, as the author also showed that. So I think one could do is like regressing each variable against the dependent variable. So it will give a clear idea. So a more different specification can be done as a robustness test. So I would like to see each explanatory variable is regressed against the dependent variable, including only the controls. So that can give a good idea. Then due to this multicollinearity issue, the author has used lasso and ridge regression. So these are these are alternatives, but not that much conventional stuffs because they have also some limitations, and also there is a problem of interpreting the results. So what I can want to suggest is using the outcomes from the ridge and lasso regression, we can identify which variables are not that relevant, and then we can exclude those variables and again run the original regression to see actually what is happening. So that can give also a good view. And side by side, we can use some conventional methods like for multicollinearity. So we can change the sample size, drop some variables, or make some clusters, composite variables, combining them and show the relationship. So, and at the end, the interesting thing is the authors have shown the relationship with the GDP. So business activity with GDP, and clearly, it doesn't go along, right? We found that the GDP growth rate is increasing or it is decreasing, whereas the business activity is moving to the opposite direction. So it needs a clear explanation. So my question was like, how much activity, this business activity is actually capturing the real scenario or real activity of Bangladesh? Then at the end, I'll look to move to the fourth paper. This one was Media, Democracy, and Globalization. So what I have understood, I think a lot of things were later added to the paper because the paper I received, I didn't got this type of a clear explanation. So my understanding is like this paper did a very interesting thing, like how the capital rate is determined. So capital return or capital tax rate is determined. So there is a branch of research literature which actually uses the fiscal system, focuses on the fiscal system, whereas there is also another strand which actually focuses on political economy, voters' choice. Now, author has interestingly combined these two and used the general equilibrium modeling. So this one was really, I think it's a good or novel aspect of this paper, but it is totally, right now this is a theoretical model. So there are only some few points that came to my mind, and I would like to have some clarification. So in one case, I found there was an assumption of no commodity market distortion, right? So what happens if this assumption is relaxed? Because I think this is a very rigid kind of assumption. So commodity market distortion is a very common thing. So what will happen if this happens? Then number two is, the paper says that incumbent political parties get support from capitalist lobby and unskilled labor lobby, these two, right? So I was thinking, like, what about the lobby of the skilled laborers? I think, for example, in case of Bangladesh, if we look at the last 15 years, there was a lot of support from skilled labor, especially, I say, from civil service or a lot of stakeholders, civil society. So I think this can be a third channel. So incumbent parties can also, if the government is for a very long period of time, then also the skilled laborers are also can play a role of the lobbyist. So this thing, I think, can be included in the game theory model. Number two is probability of winning. This was a function of capitalist lobby and transfers to unskilled workers. So two things. Probability of winning will depend on capitalist lobby, definitely, and how much transfer is done or supplied to the unskilled workers. So again, I want to add another channel, which is like a fund coming from outside. So international politics, which plays a dominant role in election outcomes before the election. Today, in fact, in our national paper, the news came out like US funded a lot of $29 million before the election. So these things came to my mind right now. So like, can we include that thing in our, in the discussion? So at the end, what I found that this is very interesting, like improvement in media image increases the capital tax rate. So correct me if I'm wrong, this is the conclusion. Improvement in media image. This will increase the capital tax rate, decrease the rate of capital, increase the transfer of poor unskilled workers. So poor unskilled workers will get more benefit, and workers' lobby becomes better off. So media image is helping kind of the unskilled poor workers. It increases their condition, whereas if we think that increase in preference towards political parties, so if political incumbent parties are more preferred to the political keeping in the power, so that will have an opposite impact. So I would like to see an empirical example or empirical studies, a lot of empirical studies, I should say, on these findings. So then this will be a very interesting thing to read or to have. So thank you all. That was.
Thanks to the discussant. And also now we will go for open discussion from the floor. And interesting points have been raised in the previous papers. One is about IMF, I think, that the first two papers concentrates on, the first one concentrates on ethics, very narrowly defined as coinciding with governance indicators, but some may argue that ethics is more than that, and just relating those indicators with GDP growth may not be ethical. Okay. The second paper, which describes the IMF negotiation and its negative and positive effects, is very relevant for Bangladesh. Currently, it is more relevant because the third installment will be coming from IMF. And few days ago, our economic advisors, Mr. Salehudin, told us that they are going to bargain with IMF about what to take and what not to take. So this second paper, which concentrates on transaction with IMF, may have lessons for us. And the third paper, Mohammad Zaman, emphasizing on Facebook data, but the fourth paper is completely opposite. It suggests that media can concoct and make different data which can misrepresent the fact. So if you, he was examining whether Facebook data correctly reflect the reality, and the other paper was examining whether media deliberately distorts reality. So these papers can be compared and their findings can be analyzed, and they both can learn from each other. With these comments, I am opening up the floor for you to raise your hand and comment or ask questions. The first one was from there.
Thank you. This is Sahemuddin Shishir from Jahangirnagar University. I'm a third-year student of the Department of Economics. My question from the fourth paper is, the author was talking about the psychological domination of media. Here, I'd like to know that root-level villagers who don't have even access to that news media, how can you capture them? And by media, he just meant that news media only. And why not other? While we observe that other media platform are impacting more than the news media nowadays. And another question from the first paper. By ethics, the author means the good governance. But in an economy, there are other economic stakeholders, and they impact the GDP growth as well. So how can we ensure economic growth only considering good governance? Thank you.
Let us take the questions first, then we will come to the authors. Meanwhile, I will request the authors to keep note of the questions posed to them.
Hello, I'm Muhammad Asim Hossain from the University of Dhaka. I would like to ask the fourth author for some more clarification. He said that capitalist lobbies can influence the ruling government to stay in power. They can support it. So, what about the other type of capitalistic lobbies that might do the opposite? That might try to oust the incumbent government. So how does your research or your findings account for that factor as well? Thank you.
Uh, Good afternoon. My name is Kausar Islam, and I am also studying at Department of Economics at Dhaka University. My question is also to the fourth author. Let me state the question. My question is, how do individual cognitive biases interact with algorithmically curated media feeds to shape personalized reality bubbles? And what are the implications of collective political understandings? Are these things that we, since that violences are occurring, these are the results of these cognitive biases that we have? Let me say this again. I am just pointing out, is there any cognitive biases we have regarding the manipulation we get from the media feeds? And my second question will be to the data-driven, sentiment-driven data presentation, and that is regarding what are the fleeting consequences that social media offers are evaluated properly in the presentation. I am specifically stating what are the points we are getting when we have the fleeting consequences of social media manipulations. Like, let me state some points. Like I am pointing out the transient online phenomena that occurs, which manipulates data, and other things are like I'm also pointing out that there are certain minorities who are not that added in the online spectrum. How are you measuring the data regarding them as well? Thank you. That was the question.
This is Mohammed Abdul Hai, teacher and student of economics, Dhaka University. I have a just clarification from Moisha Maheshi. She has a very important paper she presented, and she says Sri Lanka had to go internal shocks and external shocks. What is your prescriptions to come out of this problem that is the extremely public resistance and mistrust, lack of political goodwill, etc. If you say something like that.
If there is no more questions, then we will come to the authors. Okay.
No, I have a question about the paper which looked into the return to the capital in the media. I think it was on the first, it's on the the last paper, I think, yes. So you looked at the capital return, or return to capital, probably more on looking at the loss and profit context. But the return can be a very different thing. For example, in Bangladesh, when you look at the media, they don't really, probably they are on running loss, when it comes to their financial account, but they have profit on the other side. So, how do you really capture, because it's a media, probably is a part of their large business where they are using media for different other purposes. But for that particular media, probably the loss and profit doesn't really matter much.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes?
My name is Najat Afnan. I am a first-year undergrad student from Department of Economics, the University of Dhaka. My question is to the second author. How has the public sentiment in Sri Lanka responded to the IMF loan issue? And are they largely supportive or kind of skeptical about it? And do they see it as a necessity or an economic burden?
Do we have more time for floor discussion, or how much time is there now in our hand? 10 minutes, then I will go to the authors. Please, one by one, you can respond.
Hello? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Qazi, Maruful Islam, and also the discussion, Dr. Amin. I think the comments made on our paper is very valid. I'm thankful for your valid and important comments made. I think definitely these comments will helpful for the improvement of this paper. Yeah, I certainly agree that the definition of some of the variables should be changed from economic development to economic growth. And also we can include some more variables as determinants of economic growth. As one of the comments made from the audience, I certainly agree that there are many other variables that might affect economic growth. But at least we were able to get the correct kind of sign of why these governance issues related to the economic growth and economic crisis. In fact, in recent regime change, these were the main items in election manifestos of other political parties. Of course, in the recent political regime change, pretty much resulted by these variables. I mean, corruptions was the number one, actually, and institutional inefficiencies. These were the matters raised by the public, and then it was successful, and then we have a new government now. Yeah, the level of statistical significance is not that much high. They are weakly significant. Probably if we include some more variables or maybe relevant variables, I think we will able to get better results. And also the comment made by the discussant, yeah, during the period that we have referred in this study, 1996 to 2023, yeah, there were many changes. Yeah, I certainly agree with you. One, actually, we had 30 years of war, and then that was somehow managed by the government at that time, and also some regime change happened. In fact, during this period, we observed some of the structural issues in the macroeconomy. So one is lower tax income, right? Low revenues of tax as a percentage of GDP is very low over the reference period. In fact, many researchers raised that the tax rate should be increased to a reasonable level and then reduce the budget deficit. But for political reasons, the governments did not draw attention to raise the tax revenue. Instead, what they did was public debt. They made the decision to borrow internally as well as externally. And then what happens is that now in simple economics, we know that if government borrow money and then that money should be invested for returns. But then what happens in Sri Lanka is public debt increased, and then finally it became unsustainable, which means that now the government is borrowing to pay back the loan, right? So because there is no returns from the investment or the expenditures made using public debt. And now the current situation is that the government raised the tax rate to an exorbitant level. In fact, for instance, in my salary, 50% of my salary is going to the government, right? Back to the government because of high tax rates. So this is largely due to inefficiency of the government, misconducting. I mean, the fiscal policies were pretty much weak, and then fiscal consolidation was not there. Then at the end of the period, we had this problem of higher tax rates and also unsustainable level of public debt. So therefore, I think these are the main issues that we wanted to focus on that in this research paper, and then we got reasonably better results, but we can improve it further. And also, I agree with the comments made by the discussant. The regime change happened, but unfortunately, the regime change took place around 2015. The president emphasized the importance of governance, but unfortunately, when these malpractices were socialized, then of course it is very difficult to remove that, because everybody thinks that the way to improve the living standards is go by kind of informal procedures. So therefore, that socialization of these malpractices could not be removed once it is entered into the policies and institutions. But somehow, in the latter part of 2020s, with COVID pandemic situation and also one terrorist attack, then economy was down, and the down trend in the economy not entirely due to COVID pandemic, because when we observe the situations in the regional countries, none of the countries in the South Asian region did not go to negative economic growth, but Sri Lanka experienced negative economic growth. Still, we are just above zero. So I think this crisis happened because of, not due to COVID pandemic situation entirely, but due to the internal kind of fiscal policy issues and other governance issues. In fact, when we read the documents, I mean, finally, we became a bankrupted nation, and also according to international Fitch rating, we were our grades were down substantially, and then the IMF came with a bailout package. So if you read the bailout package, so IMF has given some conditions. In those conditions, we can see some of these governance issues has been raised. So therefore, I think this research paper raising these valid questions. But anyway, so we will try to improve this paper to a higher level, and then make it a complete research. So thank you very much.
And also, I have some
Yes, so in the interest of time,
answers for some questions.
That's
I have some answers for some question. Is it allow me to answer? Okay. If you have time, I can answer for some questions.
Okay, next time, please, huh? Because the lunch is lunch time is very sharply now. Okay.
So I'll just be very brief. I think there were some questions, and thank you very much for the questions from the discussant and the comments. So I think you've raised a very good point. How large is these IMF funds, and I mean, do they really make the difference? So it's not the funds really, not the amount of the funds, but it's, I think, more the sentiment that comes in, the accountability that comes in when when the country comes into an IMF program. But you're quite right, because there was a period post the civil war in 2009, and that also coincided with the global financial crisis and this huge quantitative easing, which released a lot of capital into emerging markets and developing countries like Sri Lanka, very cheap capital. So when we were in that time, actually the government of that day, though we were facing a lot of fiscal issues because this was after the war, we didn't go to the government because we had access to these cheap funds. And that's actually the period when we borrowed a lot of the sovereign debt. So you're quite right. I mean, the money is not the big amount. It's more the accountability that they bring in. And in terms of, I think, these negotiations that you, I'll go on to the next point. You talked about the demand for IMF loans, and I'll also combine it with this thing on public trust and whether the public, how did the public respond? So initially, because we went into this crisis, Sri Lanka had never gone into such a severe crisis, I think people were prepared and they were sort of almost asking the IMF to come in because they realized that, we really needed the IMF. But the irony is that once you put in the reforms, people don't understand what an IMF program entails because the pain is very hard. I mean, the crisis was difficult, but the reforms are also painful. So for a time, you have to go through some pain before you can actually see the benefits of a reform agenda. But I think in that, there are some things that the government also needs to understand. There are trade-offs. You don't necessarily, and I think that's where your negotiation issue comes in. I think there are certain trade-offs. So when you take fiscal consolidation, there are many ways in which to skin a cat. So what kind of fiscal consolidation, which will, you will have that fiscal restraint, but won't necessarily have a long-term impact on growth. So do you restrain public investment as well? Because you might be able to have some allowance for public investment, which will have positive impacts and restrain some other areas of public finance. So I think that is very important. Sorry, the trade-offs are very important when it comes to negotiation. So I think that's something that we have learned lessons in Sri Lanka, and also building this economic and financial literacy of people to understand that, having big governments, having large public sector is good, well and good for a time, but ultimately somebody has to pay for it. And then we talked about the tax rates. I mean, the reason why tax rates had to be increased was because our tax to GDP had fallen to 7%, probably one of the lowest in the world. So, and we all benefited from that because we were paying such low taxes. So, as I said, we need to understand the costs and benefits of certain public policies, and understand that unless you have right policies, you're going to have, you're going to face consequences. But also you need to, when you're implementing these policies, you need to understand that reforms do affect the very vulnerable, and you need to have put in place those safety nets to protect the vulnerable, because they are the most affected by some of these reforms.
So let me first complete that. So thank you, discussion, that you have really put a lot of efforts to read the paper and comment. So you see that first, commodity market distortion. So commodity market distortion was not focus of this paper, but if there is commodity market distortion, there will be change in the product's terms of trade, right? The prices will change. And if there is terms of trade effect, there will be follow-upping with Stolper simulation type effect, right? Again, factor price will change, wage rate will change, and income inequality will change, and according to the government will again react. But that was not the focus of the paper. And your second point was very much valid, that the role of skilled labor, and this was there in the modified version, right? But because you have access to the older version, but your point is really valid. That's why I have included it. So thanks for that. And then foreign funds, the role of foreign fund. This is really very interesting point that you have raised, that foreign funds can have direct influence in the election, and that in fact we have seen in the case of India also. So that is not included yet in the paper, but I can definitely think to include this. Actually, the paper is already too big, so that can be a part of the next paper in the series, but that's really an interesting point. I take it. And regarding the empirical estimation, so mine was a game theoretic general equilibrium framework, but it's really open to anyone who want to do empirics on it and validate the results. And there are some questions from the audience also regarding the psychological cost for those who have no access to newspapers or news media. See, although it's very rare that people have no access to news media, but it's true that kind of population exists. But through the words of mouth, news travels, right? So suppose I do not have access to news media, but my discussion has access to news media. So through his mouth, I will get some information, right? So that is also biased and filtered information. So like this way, news actually travels through the word of mouth also, right? Even to those who have no access to media, right? And another point is that the other form of media, apart from news media, there are other form of medias like movies, television, serials, right? So actually, that is also true. They are also influencing the electorate's mindset, the voters' mindset, right? Apart from the news media, the entertainment media is also influencing the voters' mindset, right? You can see in case of India, if you know Akshay Kumar, he is one of the leading actor in India, but nowadays he has become the puppet of the government, right? All the movies you see, the last 5 to 6 movies, those are completely pro-government, and not only pro-government, it's completely biased and ill-informed, actually. So that is also happening, but anyways, that is not part of my current paper, right? And regarding what other capitalists lobby the opposition or not, you see, in a kind of oligopolistic setup, if see who is in power, that person matters, right? Whenever we need some support or some help, we do not approach the weakest one, we approach the strongest one. So similarly, the party which is in power with an absolute majority, right, without any coalition, they have the absolute majority. So then it is very common that all capitalists will approach towards that party in power, not the opposition, who has no power actually, right? So it's a balance of power game. And regarding Professor Selim's question of returns to capital, so basically you see that in a kind of general equilibrium model, the returns to capital is actually measuring the accounting profit, because otherwise economic profit is zero in this kind of general equilibrium framework, but accounting profit is RK, that is the returns to capital, right? So that considered for economic rent. So return to capital is a proxy for profit also, right? And in other ways, there is another answer for it, that media sector may be running in loss, but media sector is held by the corporate, and corporate is looking at the media sector not for profit, but profit for the main parent company, right? For example, Adani has power, electric, and every other kind of business, right? Export, imports, port business. So when Adani is acquiring NDTV, one of the news channel in India that was most liberal, right? So why is Adani acquiring NDTV? Not for profit of NDTV, but for profit of the parent companies of Adani, right? So let NDTV suffer losses, but what NDTV is bringing in is the power to the Adani company, the bargaining power, so that Adani can bargain with the government and create profit for the other parent company, right? So that is my response. And regarding the cognitive biases, so you see the psychological cost captures the cognitive biases, which is already there in the paper, right? Thank you.
Who is the last one?
Hello. Okay, so I would keep it very short since like the time is also up. So first of all, thank you the discussants for the valuable comments. And so you were talking about the urban-centric measure. For an example, it was mainly since we have a lot of the informal economy in this country, how we are going to capture this in here. Well, my objective was to technically come to take this thing into light that there are other sources of data available as well. Since we all work in such sectors like it, we always face the data constraint. And I was technically trying to look into other sources, how we can capture the business activity trend from the side. And so you had asked another thing, that the mean value of declining. Well, the mean value declining, as I have explained before, that the activity being 0.5 means it is in normal usual activity considering the baseline. So the declining would mean considering the baseline, the activity is going down throughout different years. So that's why you can see a mean decline in the activities as well. And thank you for your suggestion regarding the control variable. So this was technically an undergraduate thesis from university. So of course it requires a lot more modification as well. So and I would like to look into other models as well. So Lasso and Reach was one of the was preferred because like it generalizes the model. It became already complex a lot. I had like 12 sectors and there are like 14 more variables, the regression results in general. But it feels very difficult when I see all of this in together. And how much is the business activity capturing the GDP? Another point. That I think I would need to go through different sort of analysis to capture, or I think I have in my mind, that is I may be working with other countries as well to get a comparison, and that would probably validate my result for Bangladesh as well. And for another last question by Mr. Kausar Islam, I think. So you were mainly talking about like those who are not added online as well. Okay, so this is the part, the data is collected from the business aspect. by the way. So for an example, you run a Facebook page, for an example, you operate through Facebook. From your end, from the page's end, so based on your business activity, if I summarize it in a short, for an example, you used to post, let's just say, 2 posts per week. Okay, so that would measure, the data set would measure the 2 posts on a week for average for you in the baseline period. So during such sort of crisis, do you intend to post more or do you intend to post less? Regarding that, they would compare it with the baseline period and give the activity level. So I don't think there would be any sort of manipulation regarded here. And since it is regarding the business owner's perspective, so those who are not included, they're mostly from the demand side, most of the consumer side here. So I was mainly focusing on the business activity. I hope this answers your question. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
So we can end this session. I will just wrap it up with only one generalized statement. In economics, there is always trade-off. So you have trade-off between IMF lobby and anti-IMF lobby. They both may have opposite perspectives, but there is a trade-off. Sometimes IMF will be correct, sometimes the anti-IMF lobby will be correct. You can have globalization with benefit, but even with globalization, you may face many wrong things. That's why the Chinese strategy is to open the window with a net there. So same with IMF. You can support the IMF policy for shrinking, for a more demand shrinking policy, but at the same time, supply should be ensured. Otherwise, inflation cannot be contained only with monetary policy. Like this, everywhere, even in the new media, you may go for the internet data about small and medium enterprises in the informal sector, but you have to check it up again with real facts. So always there is a trade-off. Let us be sincere to truth. That's the message from this seminar. Thank you all. So we can present the certificates. First is to J.G. Sri Ranjit. Okay, thank you. There will be a photo session, I think. Okay. The second is for Dr. Roshan Anne Pereira. Thank you. Mr. Mashruquz Zaman. Shushabon Mahata. Okay. So, let us break up. Huh? Thank you, sir.
Now I welcome you all to join in the lunch, and at 2 p.m. We'll have a key panel session on restoring stability in economic landscape in Bangladesh, navigating reform agendas. So I request you all to be here at 2 p.m. Thank you.